rolling out an upgraded version of the Abraham Accords is basically like offering a super olive branch. So, did it work? Will Saudi Arabia accept it? Will Iran accept it? Today, I'll give you the answer. The response came back within a day. Also, what's really going on with the US bombing Iran again? Is this about starting a new war? Is peace coming to an end? That's another topic. Also, speaking of the US, Americans being pro-CCP used to never be a problem. It was just a personal choice. But now, being pro-CCP is getting more and more dangerous. Today's news is that 2 groups of Americans have been arrested, and I'm not talking about Chinese community leaders in the US. 2 groups of Americans have been arrested or indicted, so what kind of trend does this show? Also, regarding those coming to the US to study, international students, visiting scholars, and those on media visas, the rules have changed drastically. So what exactly has changed? The era we were all familiar with is truly gone for good. Also, for those on H-1 visas who want to stay in the US, can they stay and switch to a green card, or do they have to go back to their home country? This has a huge impact on many of us, or on our children. All right, welcome to Good Morning America, brought to you by Fang Wei. Good morning to all our viewers on YouTube, and a warm hello to our listeners on Sound of Hope, Silicon Valley FM 96.1. If this is your first time tuning into Fang Wei Time, welcome. Please subscribe to our channel so you can get notified as soon as our programs are updated every day. I also want to thank all our longtime friends for your ongoing support. And please feel free to share our show with friends around you who care about current events so that more Chinese friends can gain new perspectives together. All right, let's get straight to the point and talk about 3 pieces of news related to Iran. The first is that 2 Iranian ships were laying sea mines in the Strait of Hormuz and were discovered by the US military. They were then sunk by the US military. In addition, an Iranian missile base near the Strait of Hormuz has targeted American warplanes. Then it was discovered by the US, and the US military bombed the base and destroyed it. So what exactly is going on? Also, the port of Abbas in southern Iran was bombed by the US military as well. So what's going on here? Is it peace right now, or are things about to flare up again? Central Command said these were defensive attacks, meaning it's called a defensive attack, so basically if you attack me, then I attack you. So that's what a US Department of Defense official told the news media. 2 other sources said that these attacks do not mean that the ceasefire with Iran is over, and that the attacks themselves have already ended. So basically, that's the situation. Be careful, if you hit me, I'll hit you back, and once that's done, that's it. As long as the attack solves the problem, that's enough. It's not an all-out war or open conflict. Just wanted to clarify that for everyone first. Second, there is U.S. Secretary of State Rubio. Today, he said that the wording of the potential rules with Iran might take a few days to finalize. He mentioned that in this kind of agreement, even a single word or sentence could cause controversy. So it will take some time, maybe a few days. But he also said that the Strait of Hormuz itself must remain open, unobstructed, and without any barriers. No one should be charging any kind of toll, meaning Iran can't collect any passage fees. Of course, the question still remains, what exactly is the agreement? So, based on what we know now, the core of the agreement should be, first, that Iran immediately opens the strait in exchange for the US lifting its naval blockade. I actually predicted this before, and it looks like my prediction was pretty accurate. Next, there will be 60 days of nuclear negotiations. But does it stop there? Not quite, because President Trump has already made it clear that he wants Iran to hand over its stockpile of highly enriched uranium, and also to make a commitment not to seek or develop nuclear weapons anymore. So now, according to US officials, Iran has basically agreed to these demands in principle. So what does Iran want in return? Well, Washington needs to lift the sanctions and unfreeze Iran's assets that have been frozen overseas. All right, so of course, if all of this happens, that would be great. That would basically meet Trump's demands, and then the issue could be put to rest and troops could be withdrawn. But President Trump said that these steps can only be taken after a final, verifiable agreement is reached. Okay, so just like Trump said on Sunday, we're not going to sign a bad deal. If we're going to sign, we're going to make sure it's a good deal. Sounds pretty good. So Trump's determination is real. He's definitely not going to stop at just both sides lifting the blockade and then talking about the agreement later. This time, he insists that you have to hand over the nuclear agreement and the nuclear materials. At the same time, you have to promise not to develop nuclear weapons anymore. It does sound good, but there's a small problem. How do you guarantee it will actually be carried out? Because Iran can agree to anything and then do nothing, right? That's always been the way this regime operates. Everybody knows that. So I think this agreement is essentially still in two parts, or two stages. The first stage is that both sides really do stop blockading each other. Second, in principle, Iran agrees to give up its nuclear program and hand over its nuclear waste, but the specific details will be negotiated over the next 60 days. In other words, they've just opened another negotiation window. They're simply postponing the current issue from last weekend to within the next 60 days. So, in the end, can Iran actually do this? Signing any agreement isn't hard for them, I think. It's not difficult for them at all. After signing, they just don't follow through. They agree to it, then go home and work hard on developing nuclear weapons anyway. What can you do about it? That's the situation. Honestly, I haven't seen any real solution to this so far. All right, next, let's talk about what was mentioned yesterday, Trump's so-called Abraham Accords. The White House is already calling it the Abraham Accords Plus. This plus, well, the intention behind this agreement is certainly good. As you all know, it means that this time we're not just signing a ceasefire agreement between the US and Iran. Instead, we're saying that all of you should join this agreement and make peace with Israel, shake hands, and recognize each other. And not only would we develop economic and trade relations, but after all of you join, we would also invite Iran to join. Both sides would turn from enemies to friends, and overnight, we would all pursue and achieve peace together and strive for prosperity together. All right, so will this actually work or not? Let me share my prediction first. At the end of yesterday's show, I said that I don't think it's very realistic for Iran. I don't really think they'll sign it. Why do I say that? Because for a dictatorship that has no foundation in public opinion, it's like Trump is saying, isn't it good if I help you build a country and bring you peace and prosperity? Why wouldn't you want that? I just can't figure out why you wouldn't. But the Iranian dictatorship is a regime without any public support. So where does its power come from? It's built on being anti-Western, opposing Israel, and opposing any non-believers. That's the foundation it's built on. So asking them to recognize Israel or make peace with the West, that strikes at the very core of their regime's ideology. That's their foundation, the theory that unites the people in power there. Do you really expect their regime to deny its own ideology? To deny itself? How could that ever be possible? So actually, honestly, it's just not realistic at all. I really don't think it's possible. That's my opinion. Now, some people have commented saying, Feng Wei, how do you know? How do you know that Trump doesn't understand this? If you can see it, he's the president. How could he not see it? So let me explain my reasoning here. I'm not saying I'm definitely right, but anyway, I'm just sharing my thoughts for everyone to consider and see if they make sense. Trump, he's a Manhattan businessman. As you know, Manhattan businessmen, also known as New York businessmen, what kind of people are they? Do you know what kind of reputation they have in America? They're considered the toughest businessmen in America. There's even a saying in English that goes like this: he's not a businessman. He's a New York businessman, which means he's not just any businessman, he's a New York businessman. That means New York businessmen or Manhattan businessmen are a breed apart. New York businessmen even have nicknames. They're called sharks. Predators, killers, they're called sharks, carnivores, even killers and the like. Basically, it means that New York, Manhattan businessmen are the toughest businessmen in America. So now, the toughest businessman in America has become president, and he's facing off against the world's most shameless rogues. This is a big step up from before. Previous American presidents all came from places like Harvard or Yale law schools, so as we say in Chinese, it was like a scholar running into a soldier. In American terms, that would be a gentleman going up against a thug. How can a gentleman ever beat a thug, right? But now, thankfully, it's not a gentleman anymore. It's a Manhattan businessman, the toughest businessman in America, facing off against Middle Eastern thugs. Can he win? So the question is whether negotiations can actually succeed. That's the current situation as I see it. In other words, you have a Manhattan businessman facing off against a thug who doesn't play by any business rules. As a Manhattan businessman, your strength lies in your business acumen, right? Isn't that so? But you're still a businessman, aren't you? If the other side doesn't even acknowledge or follow any business rules, what can you do? So really, even a Manhattan businessman couldn't imagine someone who doesn't follow any rules at all and is willing to promise anything. They can do absolutely nothing. So how do you deal with that, right? So, what should we do? Yeah, what should we do? Personally, I think, well, what I keep saying is that the good thing about Trump is that he's someone who really knows how to learn. Actually, Trump 2.0 is completely different from Trump 1.0, so it's important for everyone to give him feedback. A lot of people have also suggested to me, what are you telling us for? You should just tell Trump yourself. Of course, I'll try to express it as well, but I want to share something with everyone. In the past, I've talked about how this country operates. I once interviewed former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. He wrote a book called Trump versus China. I helped him translate it as Trump versus the Chinese Communist Party, but the original title was Trump versus China. The real meaning, though, is Trump versus the CCP. I've mentioned this to everyone before. Longtime viewers will know. I asked him, why did you write this book? You're Trump's friend. When Trump ran for president, that was Trump 1.0, you were his personal friend. If you had something to say, you could just tell him directly. Back when he decided to run for president, it was you who encouraged him to make up his mind. You're one of his key advisors, so why did you still feel the need to write a book? He said to truly change a country's policies, to change America's policies, you have to start with the whole population. You have to change the voters' mindset and ideas before you can really change America's policies. So, writing a book is about reaching ordinary people. It might seem slow, but it's actually the fastest and most thorough way. That's how I saw it at the time. Oh, I didn't know that. In other words, if the American people all knew, this is, what Corey and Sikashang wrote about in his book before 1958, the one about the reasons for the communists, right? He knew. He said when I was working in Washington, he was a high-ranking official in the FBI. Later, he became Hoover, the founding director of the FBI. He was Hoover's right-hand man. Maybe not exactly his right-hand man, maybe a bit higher up, but pretty close, maybe his third or fourth in command. He was someone close to Hoover, Hoover's so-called communication director. He represented the FBI in speaking to all sectors across the country. He was the FBI's director of public relations. He felt that we at the FBI were very clear about things. But the thing is, from the president on down, nobody really understood, not even the average person. So it didn't matter that we understood, because if you just randomly elect a congressman or a president, they're still going to be confused. That's why he finally decided he had to write a book to help the public understand. When the public understands, since the president is elected from among the people, and so are the members of Congress, then the country won't have problems. So in 1958, after spending 5 years, starting in 1953, he began writing this book. He eventually left the FBI. After retiring from the FBI, he went to Birmingham Young University, to be a professor. It was during that time that he spent 5 years writing this book. Within 3 years, from 1958 to 1961, this book became one of the best sellers in the United States. So this book was called The Bible of the American Cold War, and in the end, it awakened all of Hollywood. Back then, Hollywood was really, really great. One of Hollywood's leaders at the time was Ronald Reagan. He was the president of the Screen Actors Guild back then. So by awakening Hollywood, awakening the people, and awakening the media, it ultimately led the United States to fully enter the Cold War. Of course, this also included things like the Soviet Union launching satellites like Sputnik, which really spurred the Americans. But anyway, the point is, it's the same principle. If you want to get things done in the United States, you have to make sure the public understands. So English language media is actually crucial. If you look at the people around Trump, you might think that just saying a couple of words to him would change his mind, but that's not the case. That's not necessarily the case. So English language media is extremely important. So, right? I often hear Chinese people say, what's the point of talking to us? Go do English language media. Why are you making this Chinese blog? Why are you making this Chinese YouTube channel? Of course, doing English language media is my dream. But for me, that's not realistic, because one person's energy is limited. You can only take it one step at a time. Running an English language media outlet requires 10 to 30 times more talent and funding than a Chinese language media outlet. Chinese people can get by with a little money to pursue their ideals. Westerners, on the other hand, have a much higher standard of living. If their salary doesn't reach a certain level, they simply can't make ends meet. The whole family wouldn't be able to survive. So their companies are several times bigger than Chinese ones. Yeah, so, Do you know who the parent company of CNN is? CNN's parent company is Warner Brothers, right? CBS's parent company is Paramount, ABC's parent company is Disney, and NBC's parent company is Comcast. I don't know if you all have noticed this. Why is it like this? Why can't these companies just be independent? Why do they always have to be backed by some big company, some giant corporation? The reason is that, generally speaking, media companies don't make a lot of money. They actually spend money. Media is really a public service, so they need to have a big boss or a profitable company backing them. It could be Disney, Universal Studios, companies in the film and television industry, or broadband network companies like Comcast. Of course, the only exception is Fox. Fox is a bit unique. The vast majority of American media just can't survive without a financial backer. Back in 2003, in 2003, there was an elderly lady in San Diego named Joanne Kroc. Before she passed away, she donated $200 million, $200 million to National Public Radio, NPR. This became quite the story at the time. That money was really important for NPR. NPR put it into their endowment fund. What does that mean? Basically, it's like a fund set up while someone is still alive, a kind of financial reserve. They put the money there, and it always stays there. It's not like NPR took the $200 million and spent it right away. Instead, they invest the money, and it's the interest earned from those investments that gets put into running the media organization. It's just like how the Ivy League schools in the US operate. Each top university has its own endowment fund. People donate money to these funds, and the money stays there, generating investment interest, which is then used to run the school. That's what it means. This is one way to do it, and it's another way for media organizations to survive, because media really is a public service. It's not a business that makes a lot of money. First, working in media is tough. Second, it costs a lot. And third, it's really important, right? So it truly shapes the way people in this country think. That's what it's all about. So that's how it is. You could say the waters run deep here. I'll just put it that way. What can I do? Right now, I'm working in Chinese media. Right now, I'm talking to our Chinese community, having conversations with our fellow Chinese. Maybe one day, some insightful people among us, especially those who are business owners, will see the need in America for a new generation of mainstream English language media. And then maybe they'll think, hey, maybe this guy Feng Wei could pull it off. They might feel they can trust me. Then they'd be willing to put up the money, a significant amount, to make this happen. We could create a Chinese-run, what would you call it? A new mainstream media fund. Just kidding, or maybe not. I'm just talking about a distant idea here. Running an English language media outlet in the US isn't that simple, but it's something that's extremely, extremely important. So we've just been doing what we do. Every day we talk about the news, and everyone watches the news every day. Maybe, just maybe, one day we Chinese will decide to step up and put our strength together to build something like this. A new mainstream English language media outlet that understands America and understands communism with the funding to make it happen. All right, I got a bit off track there. Let me get back to the point. So what can everyone do right now to help Feng Wei? You might say, I'm not a boss, I don't have money. Well, just subscribe to this channel and share my shows with others. Because when I do this show, it's not just about reporting the news. I genuinely hope to bring together a group of insightful Chinese people, those who can see through what's happening in society, in America, and in the world. And together, we can do something meaningful. So subscribing, liking, sharing, and leaving comments are all ways to help this channel grow and reach more people. By doing that, you become a part of this media outlet too. All right, let's get back to talking about the strengthening and improvement of the Abraham Accords. This upgraded version is really intense. Trump said it's mandatory. He's requiring Arab countries to join. He specifically named 6 countries: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Pakistan, Egypt, Jordan, and Turkey. He made it clear that Saudi Arabia and Qatar are to take the lead among the Arab countries. They should be the first to sign and join. After everyone joins, then Iran will join too. Of course, I've already explained the meaning of this olive branch to everyone. It means we're working together for peace, putting aside our differences, basically turning swords into plowshares. So what happened? Very quickly, just yesterday, Saudi Arabia said they won't agree unless there's an irreversible path toward the establishment of a Palestinian state. They said this before joining, meaning they didn't completely reject it, but there has to be a path for the establishment of a Palestinian state. So you can see that's their stance. As for Qatar, they basically said the same thing. They said that any normalization of relations with Israel depends on resolving the Palestinian issue. And Pakistan was even more blunt. They directly said that the Abraham Accords and negotiations with Iran are 2 separate things, and that this proposal is unacceptable. Pakistan was the toughest, showing the least respect for Trump. Of course, the other 3 countries aren't that important. As for the others, Jordan, Egypt, and Turkey, they basically already recognize Israel anyway. So there really wasn't any earth shattering decision to be made, which means this whole thing basically fell through. As I mentioned yesterday, there are three key hurdles for the Abraham Accords to succeed. The first is how to resolve the Gaza war. The second is whether Saudi Arabia is willing to join, since Saudi Arabia is the leader of the Arab world. The third is whether Iran would join. But the second hurdle hasn't been cleared, and without that, the rest can't move forward. But no matter what, can the third hurdle be cleared? Of course not. As I've told you before, how could Iran possibly go along with this? Sure enough, today Iran's supreme leader Khamenei posted a message on Telegram. Right now is the time for pilgrimage, so he released something called pilgrimage guidance. He said that the hands of time will not turn back. The countries and lands of this region will no longer serve as a shield for American bases. Not only will the United States no longer have a safe haven in this region to carry out sabotage and establish military bases, but America will never be safe again. A threat? Khamenei is making a threat like this. So when Trump extends an olive branch, this is how he responds. In other words, the answer's already clear, right? Khamenei means to push America back. Knowing the US is already struggling, he wants to force a withdrawal. Second, he's intimidating the Gulf countries. So that's basically the situation. But no matter what, no matter how you look at it, the Abraham Accords, when they were first established back then, did manage to bring in the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, and later Kazakhstan. So it really did leave behind an option to consider for the future. After all, it was a breakthrough agreement. It really was. It was very creative and did achieve some initial results, but what will happen in the long run? Well, we'll just have to wait and see. All right, now let's talk about the US tracking down Chinese Communist Party agents in America. What's going on here? We all know that pro-CCP community leaders in the US are being investigated, prosecuted, and sentenced more and more frequently now. There have already been quite a few cases, mainly concentrated in New York and Los Angeles. So several community leaders have already ended up in jail for serving the Chinese Communist Party. But if you think it's only Chinese people, then you're mistaken, because Americans are involved too. What do I mean? Let me give you two examples. These are both from today's news. In Texas, there's a media reporter. He's a white guy. His name is Thomas Will. His pen name is Tom McGregor. Yeah, McGregor. That's the guy on the left here. He worked at Beijing CCTV, the central television station, for at least 10 years. So what did he do for them? He worked as an editor, as a commentator. It was just a job back then. You know, in China, they really understand the saying, money makes the world go round, right? As long as you have money, you can hire a lot of Americans. They'd hire Americans to write articles criticizing other Americans. This is what Americans have called freedom, in quotation marks, for the past few decades. So what happened? This person, earlier this February, was suspected of illegally acting as an agent for the Chinese Communist Party and was arrested by the FBI. So this Friday, actually the day after tomorrow, he will attend a so-called pre-indictment plea hearing. This guy is no ordinary person. He's a veteran political figure in the Texas Republican Party named Tom Polkin's son. This old Polkin once served as the chairman of the Texas Republican Party and also worked in the Reagan administration, so he's been around for a long time. But in the US, you know, what the father does and what the son does are two completely different things. They can be totally unrelated. At least compared to China, the relationship between father and son here is much weaker. People are free to do whatever they want. As for him, he's been a so-called freelance writer in the US for many years, not affiliated with any particular media outlet. And in 2010, he went to Beijing. He said himself that he went to Beijing. And it seems that by 2016, or maybe even earlier, he started working for CCTV. What did he do there? He worked as a commentator and editor at CCTV, and on CGTN, which is China Global Television Network, he wrote commentaries or gave interviews. So CGTN introduced him as a Beijing-based Asia-Pacific affairs consultant and a geopolitical commentator. He also wrote commentaries for the Global Times and similar outlets, taking a firm stance. His views were outspokenly pro-communist. While in China, he worked for the MSS. They wouldn't let him slip away. They recruited him and even gave him a polygraph test. They were worried that this person might become a double agent in the future. So between 2022 and 2023, they arranged for this guy, his pen name is McGregor, but his real name is Balkan, to take a polygraph test. During the test, they asked if he had ever worked for the CIA. Of course, he passed the polygraph. He hadn't worked for the CIA. As a result, he not only became a foreign media celebrity favored by the Chinese Communist Party, but also secretly worked for China's Ministry of State Security. He traveled back and forth between China and the US many times, with all his travel expenses covered by the Chinese side. His superiors at the Ministry of State Security would typically give him $7,000 to $8,000 for each trip to the US. And the official reason for these trips was to write reports needed by CCTV. Altogether, he received at least $100,000 in payments, and that's just for travel expenses. Who knows how much he was getting paid in Beijing? Then, in 2019, when President Trump was looking to recruit someone to join the White House team, he happened to know this person and got in touch with him. Now, the indictment doesn't say who this person is, but he got in touch with him and asked him to write reports for the Chinese Communist Party, to write reports about Trump's situation and send them to the CCP. Then, moving forward to January 2025, during Trump's second term, Paquin was about to return from Beijing to the US and wanted to arrange a meeting with this person because there was a chance he might join Trump's team again. But in the end, the FBI detained him, and after detaining him, they questioned him to find out what was going on. Then the FBI told him, "We're not going to arrest you. You should just go back to Beijing and carry on as usual. Keep working for the Chinese side." At the same time, they also wanted him to work for them, basically making him a double agent. That's how it was. In the end, he went back to China. So he went back to China and stayed there for another year. This February, he returned to the US and, in a hotel in Washington, met with the person we mentioned earlier who had gotten into Trump's team. So then, what happened? At this point, you might wonder, as a double agent, who is his real boss? Is it the Chinese Communist Party or the US? Clearly, it's not the US. So he helped the Chinese Communist Party get in touch with this person and gave him a SIM card provided by the CCP. That way, they could avoid FBI surveillance. Then, they promised him a $10,000 bonus. The condition was that he had to cooperate with Chinese intelligence officers and write a weekly report that reflected the direction of US policy, a situation report that would be personally read by Xi Jinping. So what happened after the meeting ended? Wow, Bill immediately went in and arrested him. Even though he met this person in the hotel and thought he wasn't being watched, the FBI had actually been watching him closely the whole time. So they went in and took him into custody. His lawyer said, "Oh, this case is only about failing to register as an agent. It doesn't involve espionage or leaking US secrets." Even so, it's called being charged as an unregistered agent, which is a violation of Section 951 of the US Code, a felony charge. In other words, acting as an agent for a foreign government without notifying the US Attorney General. This is different from the usual FARA cases. But this charge is even more serious. The maximum sentence can be up to 10 years in prison, so his lawyer didn't think it was a big deal. 10 years, do you really think that's nothing? It's not that simple.